The sob that tore through the phone line was raw enough to strip paint, and Malachi Xanthakis, who had heard the death rattles of kings and the final prayers of martyrs across 6 centuries, found his ancient stillness disrupted by the desperate hiccup of breath that followed. "Please," the voice whispered, female and young and breaking apart like ice under spring sun. "He hit me again. I don't know what to do anymore." Malachi's fingers tightened around the phone, his pale skin almost luminous in the dim light of his study. The chandeliers overhead cast shadows across walls lined with books that predated the printing press, and through the arched windows behind him, the city sprawled in electric brightness, unaware that beneath its oldest quarter, in a network of stone halls and vaulted chambers, the vampire king held court over the immortal and the ancient. "Where are you?" His voice came out low, controlled, though something old and violent had begun to uncurl in his chest. A pause, a sniffle. "I'm sorry. I must have wrong number. I meant to call. Tell me where you are." Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between that made mortal instincts prickle with awareness that the thing on the other end of the line was not entirely human, even if consciousness couldn't name why. "I shouldn't have bothered anyone. I'm sorry." But she didn't hang up. The connection held, fragile as spider silk, and through it Malachi could hear her breathing, uneven and frightened. "You called this number for a reason." He kept his voice steady, gentle in the way a man might gentle a wounded animal. "Perhaps not the reason you thought, but you called. And I am telling you, don't move. Stay exactly where you are and tell me where to find you." The silence stretched. Then, so quietly he had to strain even his preternatural hearing. "Apartment 4C 1247 Ashwood Street, but you don't have to." Malachi was already moving, the phone tucked against his shoulder as he shrugged into a long black coat that whispered like raven's wings. His hair, white as bone and falling past his shoulders, caught the light as he moved through the corridors of his domain. Guards in formal dress stepped aside without being asked, their own pale faces and dark eyes marking them as his kindred, his subjects. "What's your name?" he asked, taking the stairs 3 at a time with inhuman grace. "Violet. Violet Ortiz." A pause. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't like men who hit women." True enough, though insufficient. Malachi had ended mortal lives for less across the centuries, had dispensed justice and vengeance with equal cold precision. But this felt different. The sob on the phone had reached through all his careful control and found something he'd thought long buried under years and protocol and the weight of a crown. "He'll be back soon," Violet whispered. "He just went to get cigarettes. When he comes back, he won't touch you again." Malachi stepped out into the night air, and it welcomed him like an old lover, cool and full of secrets. The entrance to the vampire court was hidden beneath a historic building, its surface operations a private club that catered to the wealthy and discreet. No one looked twice at the pale man who emerged and slid into a black car that had appeared as if summoned. The driver, a vampire named Constantine who had served Malachi for 2 centuries, asked no questions, simply drove when given the address. They moved through the city streets with the kind of speed that bent traffic laws without quite breaking them, and Malachi kept the phone pressed to his ear, keeping Violet talking. "Tell me about yourself," he said, watching the buildings blur past. "Anything. Everything." "Why?" But she sounded less frightened now, more confused. "Because I want to know who I'm coming to help." Also true, though not complete. The truth was that Malachi needed to keep her on the line, needed to follow the thread of her voice like Theseus following Ariadne's string out of the labyrinth. If she hung up, if she disappeared into silence, something told him he would tear the city apart to find her. "I'm nobody," Violet said. "I work at a diner on 5th Street, the Bluebird. I make rent barely. I thought he loved me. In the beginning, he was so sweet. They often are." Malachi had seen this pattern before, across decades and centuries. The same script, different actors. It never stopped making him angry. Then he lost his job and he started drinking more, and I made excuses because I wanted to believe. Her voice cracked. God, I'm so stupid. You're not stupid, you're human, you hoped. Hope isn't stupid. The words felt strange in his mouth, he who had long ago abandoned hope for certainty, for power, for control. Ashwood Street appeared ahead, a row of apartment buildings that had seen better decades. Malachi was out of the car before it fully stopped, the phone still at his ear. Which building, Violet? The brick one, middle. But really, you don't have to. 4th floor, apartment C. He was already inside, moving past a broken security door and upstairs that smelled of old cooking and older desperation. His footsteps made no sound. At the 4th floor landing, he paused. I'm outside your door. A long silence. Then, so quietly, how did you get here so fast? I'm very motivated. He could hear her now, even without the phone, could hear her heartbeat and the rustle of fabric as she moved. Could smell the copper tang of blood, not much, but enough to make the predator in him tense with interest and something darker. Let me in, Violet. The door opened a crack, chain still engaged, and he got his first look at her. She was small, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and eyes that might have been warm brown in better circumstances, but now were red-rimmed and frightened. A bruise was forming on her left cheekbone, and there was a split in her lower lip. Malachi felt something very old and very cold settle over him, the kind of calm that preceded violence. You're... Violet stared at him through the gap, and he knew what she was seeing. He was tall, dressed in black that probably cost more than she made in a month, with features that were too fine, too perfect to be entirely natural. His hair was pure white despite the fact that his face looked no older than 30, and his eyes were a pale gray that sometimes looked silver in certain light. He knew the effect he had on mortals, had known it for 600 years. I'm here to help. He kept his voice soft. Let me in, Violet. She unlatched the chain with shaking fingers. The apartment beyond was small but clean, furnished with mismatched pieces that spoke of thrift stores and hope. There were plants on the windowsill, books stacked on a coffee table made from a repurposed door. It was the home of someone who tried, who cared, who made the best of little. And then Malachi's attention fixed on the details that mattered. The overturned chair, the scattered pills from a prescription bottle, the dent in the drywall at exactly the height of Violet's head. Show me. He gestured to her face. Violet touched her cheek self-consciously. It's not that bad. I've had worse. That isn't the reassurance you think it is. Malachi moved closer, and he was careful, so careful, to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. He had learned, across the centuries, how to move around frightened things. May I? When she nodded, he reached out and gently tilted her face toward the light. The bruise was already darkening, and her lip had bled enough to stain her teeth pink when she'd bitten it. Up close, he could smell her properly. Cheap shampoo and diner grease, and underneath it all, the warm, living scent of mortal blood that called to the monster he kept carefully leashed. He dropped his hand and stepped back, giving her space. When will he return? I don't know. Soon, probably. He always comes back. Violet wrapped her arms around herself. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I meant to call my friend Sarah, but I must have mixed up the numbers, and fate has a sense of humor. Malachi turned, surveying the apartment with the eye of someone who had planned sieges and defended castles. Pack a bag. Essentials only. You're coming with me. What? No, I can't just... Yes, you can. He looked back at her, and for a moment he let her see something of what he was. The weight of centuries, the absolute certainty of someone who had commanded armies and bent nations to his will. You called for help. I'm here. Don't waste it. Violet's mouth opened, closed, then, who are you? Really? A fair question. Malachi considered how much truth to offer and settled on a careful fraction. Someone with resources, someone who can make sure Derek never raises his hand to you again. You can't just, he'll find me. He always finds me. I tried leaving before, and he won't find you where I'm taking you. Malachi pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to Constantine. And if by some chance he does, he will regret it far more than he can currently imagine. There was something in the way he said it, flat and absolute, that made Violet believe him. She nodded slowly and disappeared into what must be her bedroom. Malachi could hear her moving around, opening drawers, the zip of a bag. He used the time to examine the apartment more carefully. The prescription bottle on the floor was for anxiety medication in Violet's name. The books on the coffee table were a mix of fantasy novels and culinary textbooks. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a bluebird, was a schedule for the diner where she worked. Everything spoke of a life assembled from hope and hard work, now fractured by someone else's cruelty. Malachi was considering what to do about Derek when he heard the footsteps in the stairwell. Heavy, uneven, accompanied by whistling that was slightly off-key. His hearing, sharper than any mortal's, caught the jingle of keys. Violet. His voice was quiet but cut through the apartment like a blade. Is that him? She emerged from the bedroom, bag in hand, and her face went white. Yes. Oh, God, he's early. Stay behind me. You don't understand, he'll behind me, not a request. Malachi moved to stand between Violet and the door, and the temperature in the apartment seemed to drop several degrees. Outside, the footsteps had reached the fourth-floor landing. The door burst open. Derek hadn't bothered to lock it, arrogant in his assumption of control, and the man who stumbled in was everything Malachi expected. Mid-30s, stubbled, wearing a jacket that smelled of beer and cigarettes. His face was flushed, his eyes already hardening when he saw Violet. Where the hell have you been? I told you to. The words died when he registered Malachi's presence. Who the fuck are you? Leaving. Malachi's voice was pleasant, conversational. With Violet. You won't see her again. Derek's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, anger, a sneer that thought it understood. Oh, I get it. Found yourself a new sugar daddy, Violet. That was fast. He took a step forward, swaying slightly. Well, guess what, sweetheart? You're not going anywhere until we talk about. He reached for her. It was a mistake. Malachi moved faster than a mortal eye could track, and suddenly he was there, his hand wrapped around Derek's wrist with the kind of pressure that stopped blood flow and ground bones together. Derek yelped, tried to pull away, and found himself unable to move. Listen carefully. Malachi's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. You will never contact Violet again. You will never look for her. You will forget she exists. If I hear that you've so much as thought about finding her, I will come back. And when I come back, I will show you things that will make every nightmare you've ever had seem like pleasant dreams. Do you understand? Derek's face had gone from red to white. Up close, he could see Malachi's eyes, could see something in them that primitive hindbrain recognized as apex predator. You can't. Malachi tightened his grip, just slightly, and Derek felt something in his wrist creak. Do you understand? Yes, Jesus, yes. Malachi released him, and Derek stumbled back, cradling his wrist. For a moment, their eyes met, and Malachi let the glamour drop just a fraction, let Derek see the silver that swam in his irises, the way his canines were just a bit too sharp. Let him see, in that instant, that the man standing in his apartment was not entirely a man at all. Derek ran. Actually turned and fled out of his own apartment, his footsteps pounding down the stairs in a panicked rhythm. Malachi turned back to Violet, smoothing his expression back to something approaching human. Shall we go? Violet was staring at him with wide eyes, her bag clutched to her chest. What are you? A moment of truth. Malachi had lived long enough to know when lies would serve and when they wouldn't. Someone who keeps his promises. Are you coming? She should have said no. Should have been terrified, should have run like Derek had. But Violet looked at the broken chair, at the dent in the wall, at the door Derek had left swinging open. Then she looked back at Malachi, at his strange pale beauty and his ancient eyes, and made a choice. Yes. The car was waiting where Constantine had left it. Malachi held the door for Violet, then slid in beside her. She sat pressed against the opposite door, her bag in her lap, watching him with the wary attention of someone who had just realized they might have traded one dangerous situation for another. "Where are we going?" she asked as the car pulled into traffic. "Somewhere safe." Malachi was aware of how ominous that sounded, how every kidnapper in history had probably said something similar. "I have a residence. It's secure. You'll have your own room, your own space. No one will hurt you there." "And what do you want in return?" "Sharp girl." Malachi found himself almost smiling. "Nothing you're not willing to give. I don't trade in that kind of currency." "Everyone wants something." "True." He turned to look at her properly, and in the passing streetlights, his features seemed to shift between shadow and pale luminescence. "I want to understand why the sound of you crying reached through 6 centuries of careful indifference and made me move. I want to know why a wrong number felt like fate. But those are my wants, my questions. They don't require anything from you except your presence while I figure it out." Violet blinked. That was the weirdest answer anyone has ever given me. I'm a weird person. Also insufficient, but true enough. They drove in silence for a while, and Malachi watched Violet's reflection in the window as she watched the city pass. She was younger than he'd initially thought, probably mid-20s, with a kind of face that would have been pretty if not for the fear and exhaustion etched into it. She had paint under her fingernails, he noticed, the kind that suggested she was an artist in her spare time, and there was a small scar on her right hand that looked like a childhood injury. The car descended into an underground parking structure beneath the historic building that served as the entrance to the vampire court. Violet looked around nervously as Constantine parked in a space marked with symbols that predated modern language. "This is a parking garage," she said uncertainly. "Among other things." Malachi got out and offered his hand to help her from the car. She hesitated, then took it, and the warmth of her skin against his cold palm sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with the living energy that mortals carried with them like a flame. He led her to an elevator that required no buttons, only a palm pressed to a panel that recognized him instantly. They descended, and Violet's ears popped with the pressure change. "How far down are we going?" she asked. "Far enough that the sun is never a concern." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and he felt her tense beside him. The elevator opened onto a corridor that belonged in a different century. Stone walls, carved with intricate patterns, rose to a vaulted ceiling held up by pillars that had been hewn from single pieces of marble. Lanterns burned in iron sconces, though whether by flame or more modern means was hard to tell in the flickering light. The air smelled of age and stone and something else, something rich and strange that Violet couldn't name. "This is impossible," she whispered. "We're under the city. How is this? Old cities have old bones." Malachi guided her forward with a hand at the small of her back. "What's built on top forgets what's underneath. We don't." They passed others in the corridors, and Violet tried not to stare. Every person they encountered was beautiful in an unsettling way. Too pale, too graceful, moving with a liquid quality that defied normal human locomotion, and they all stopped and bowed when they saw Malachi, their eyes downcast, their postures speaking of respect and fear. "They're bowing to you," Violet said. "Yes." "Why?" Malachi stopped in front of a heavy wooden door bound in iron. "Because this is my court, my domain, and they are my subjects." He pushed the door open and gestured for her to enter. "Welcome to your new home, Violet Ortiz, at least until you decide otherwise." The room beyond was larger than her entire apartment and furnished with the kind of antiques that belonged in museums. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its curtains the deep red of old wine. Tapestries hung on the stone walls depicting scenes of forests and hunts and dancing figures under pale moons. A fireplace held a fire that burned without smoke, and beside it, 2 chairs upholstered in midnight blue velvet invited conversation. "This is too much," Violet said faintly. "I can't." "You can." Malachi moved to the fireplace, giving her space to explore. "There's a bathroom through that door, fully modernized despite appearances. The wardrobe has clothes that should fit, and if they don't, tell me and I'll have more brought. You're safe here, Violet. That's not a promise, it's an absolute fact. She set her bag down slowly, and he watched her struggle with whether to ask the question they both knew was hovering. Finally, "What are you people?" Malachi turned to face her, and the firelight cast his white hair in shades of amber and gold. "You know what we are. Some part of you recognized it the moment you saw us. You're simply afraid to say it out loud. That's not possible. Those are stories. Legends. All legends start somewhere." He moved closer, and Violet held her ground, though he could hear her heartbeat accelerate. "We are what your grandmothers warned you about. We are the things that go bump in the night. We are the reason you fear the dark and trust your instincts when they scream danger." He stopped an arm's length away. "We are vampires, Violet, and I am their king." The words hung in the air between them. Violet's face cycled through disbelief, fear, and then a strange sort of resignation. "I should run," she said. "You should," he agreed. "But you saved me from Derek. You brought me somewhere safe. You haven't hurt me." "Not yet." At her sharp look, he added, "I have no intention of hurting you. But honesty requires I acknowledge that I am a dangerous thing, and you are very vulnerable." "Why did you come when I called?" The question that mattered, finally asked. Malachi turned back to the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. "I don't know. In 6 centuries I have heard countless cries for help, and I have chosen when to answer based on politics, strategy, benefit to my people. But when I heard you..." He trailed off, searching for words that had been lost to him in languages that no longer existed. "When I heard you, I moved without thinking, as if pulled by strings I couldn't see, as if the universe itself had reached down and redirected me. That sounds like fate." Violet's voice was soft. "I don't believe in fate. I believe in choices." He looked back at her. "But I'm open to having my mind changed." They stood there, vampire king and battered waitress, separated by centuries and species and everything that should have made connection impossible. And yet something hummed in the space between them, something that felt older than both of them, inevitable as tide. "I should let you rest," Malachi said finally. "It's been an eventful night. The door locks from the inside, and no one will enter without your permission. If you need anything, there's a bell pull by the bed that will summon an attendant. Will I see you again?" The question surprised them both. "Do you want to?" Violet considered, her hand unconsciously touching her bruised cheek. "You're the first person who came when I called, the first person who didn't make excuses or tell me it was my fault or that I should try harder to make it work. So yes, I want to see you again." Something in Malachi's chest, something he'd thought long atrophied, turned over. "Then you will. Sleep well, Violet." He left before he could do something foolish like reach for her, like promise her things he had no business promising. In the corridor outside, he leaned against the cold stone and closed his eyes, breathing in air he didn't technically need, trying to center himself. Constantine was waiting at the end of the hall, his ancient face carefully neutral. "My lord." "Not a word," Malachi warned. "I said nothing." "Your silence is deafening." Malachi straightened and began walking back toward his own chambers. "Have someone watch her room, discreetly. I want to know if she tries to leave or if she needs anything." "Of course." A pause. "May I ask what you plan to do with her?" "I don't know." The honest answer. "For now, she stays. She's under my protection. The court will talk. The court always talks. Let them." Malachi's voice hardened. "If anyone disturbs her, if anyone makes her feel unsafe or unwelcome, they answer to me directly. Spread the word." Constantine bowed and disappeared into the shadows, moving with the speed that marked him as one of the old ones. Malachi continued to his chambers, but he knew he wouldn't rest. Not with Violet's heartbeat echoing in his memory, not with her face imprinted behind his eyelids. The Vampire King had ruled for 3 centuries, had brought peace to the fractious clans, had navigated wars both supernatural and mortal. He had thought himself beyond surprise, beyond the small disruptions of something as mundane as attraction. But then, he thought, as he settled into his chair and stared at the flames in his own fireplace, He had never expected fate to call his phone by accident. In her room, Violet explored slowly, touching the tapestries, examining the books on the shelves, leather-bound volumes in languages she didn't recognize, alongside more modern editions of poetry and philosophy. The bathroom was indeed modern, all marble and brass fixtures that probably cost more than she'd earned in her lifetime. The wardrobe held clothes that would fit her if she tried them on, which meant someone had known her size before she arrived, which should have been creepy but somehow wasn't. She caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror and winced. The bruise on her cheek had fully formed now, a sunset of purple and yellow. Her lip was swollen. She looked like what she was, a victim of violence, a woman who had nowhere else to go. Except that wasn't quite true anymore, was it? Violet touched the mirror, her fingers leaving prints on the glass. A vampire king. It should have been laughable, should have been the delusion of someone in shock. But she'd seen the way those people in the corridor had bowed. She'd felt the cold of Malachi's skin, seen the inhuman speed with which he'd moved. She'd looked into his eyes and seen centuries looking back. And he'd come when she called. That was the part that kept circling back in her mind. She'd dialed a wrong number in her darkest moment, and instead of hang-ups or awkward silence, she'd gotten a vampire king who appeared in her apartment and made Derek run like a terrified child. Violet laughed, and it turned into a sob, and then she was crying again. But this time it was different. This time it was release, was the letting go of months of fear and pain, and the constant walking on eggshells that came with living with someone whose moods turned on a dime. She cried herself out in that bathroom, in that impossible underground palace, and when she finally stopped, she felt emptier but cleaner, as if the tears had washed away some of the accumulated damage. Sleep came easier than she expected, in that enormous bed with its impossibly soft sheets. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was of pale gray eyes and a voice that promised protection without demanding payment. 3 floors below, in the throne room that served as the center of vampire politics, Malachi held court. The various clan representatives had gathered for their weekly audience, and the usual business proceeded with the usual tedium: territorial disputes, requests for permission to turn new vampires, reports of hunter activity in the outer districts. But tonight, Malachi found his attention wandering, which was unlike him. He who had mastered the art of perfect focus across centuries, who could listen to 17 different conversations and parse truth from lie with absolute precision, kept thinking about a woman sleeping 3 floors above. "My lord?" The voice belonged to Serafina, one of his oldest advisors, a vampire turned during the Black Death who had served him faithfully for 200 years. "Your thoughts seem elsewhere. A temporary distraction." Malachi forced his attention back to the gathered vampires. "Continue." But Serafina was not so easily dismissed. "Is it true you've brought a mortal into the court? A human under your personal protection?" The room went silent. Every vampire present turned to look at their king with various expressions of curiosity, concern, or in some cases, hunger. Yes. No point in denying what half the court had already witnessed. "She is under my protection. Absolutely and without exception. Anyone who forgets this will wish they hadn't." "My lord, with respect," began Victor, a younger vampire who had been turned during one of the European wars and still carried military bearing. "Mortals in the court are a complication. They're fragile, they ask questions, and they smell like—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Malachi interrupted, his voice dropping to a temperature that made frost seem warm. Victor wisely closed his mouth. "She stays," Malachi said flatly. "If that presents a problem for anyone, they are welcome to bring their concerns to me. Privately, in my chambers, where we can discuss in detail why their opinions on this matter are irrelevant." No one took him up on the offer. The rest of the court proceedings passed without incident, though Malachi could feel the undercurrent of gossip that would spread through the court like wildfire. A mortal in the Vampire King's protection. The implications would be discussed in every corner of his domain by dawn. Let them talk. Malachi had learned centuries ago that he couldn't control gossip, only facts. And the fact was that Violet was here, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. When the last petitioner had been dismissed and the throne room had emptied, Serafina remained. She was small, pale even by vampire standards, with white hair she wore in an elaborate braid and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said quietly. "I'm not playing anything. You brought a mortal into the heart of our world. You've claimed her as under your protection, which by our laws makes her untouchable, but also makes her your responsibility. If she reveals us, if she runs screaming to the mortal authorities, if she proves to be a liability, she won't. You can't know that. You've known her for what, 3 hours?" Malachi stood and descended from the dais that held his throne, a chair carved from a single piece of obsidian that had been old when Rome was young. I know that when I heard her voice, something in me woke that had been sleeping for longer than I care to admit. I know that when I saw her face, saw what had been done to her, I wanted to tear the world apart. I know that she looked at me, knowing what I am, and chose to come with me anyway. That's what I know, Serafina. The old vampire studied him with eyes that missed nothing. Then she sighed. "You're falling for her. I barely know her." That's not a denial. It wasn't. Malachi moved to one of the narrow windows that looked out onto the underground city that sprawled beyond the palace. His people lived here, in the deep places beneath the mortal world, in caverns that had been expanded and beautified over centuries. Bioluminescent gardens, buildings carved from living rock, streets lit by captured starlight. It was a kingdom unto itself, hidden from human eyes. "What if I am?" he said finally. "What if I've lived 600 years, done my duty, ruled wisely, sacrificed everything personal for the good of our kind, and now I want something for myself?" "Then I would say you've earned it." Serafina's voice softened. "But be careful, my king. Mortals are fragile. Their lives are brief. If you give your heart to her, you'll watch her age and die in what will feel like the blink of an eye. Can you bear that?" Malachi didn't answer because he didn't know. Instead, he asked, "What if she chooses to become one of us? Would you turn her? Would you take her mortality, her humanity, her ability to walk in the sun and grow old and die naturally? Would you condemn her to an eternity of blood and darkness?" "If she asks me to, yes. And if she doesn't ask, then I'll love her for however long she'll let me and let her go when the time comes." The words hurt to say, hurt to even contemplate, but they were true. I won't trap her, I won't take her choices, but I also won't pretend I don't feel what I feel. Serafina crossed the distance between them and placed a small hand on his arm. "Then I wish you joy, Malachi. Truly. It's been a long time since I've seen you care about anything beyond duty." She left him there, staring out at the underground city, thinking about a woman sleeping in a room 3 floors above and wondering what the morning would bring. Violet woke to soft light filtering through what shouldn't be possible windows in an underground room. She sat up, disoriented, and realized that the windows were actually elaborate screens displaying a recorded sunrise, timed to mimic the natural rhythm of day above. Someone had been in her room while she slept. The realization should have terrified her, but instead she noticed that a tray had been left on the table by the fireplace. Coffee, still hot, and an assortment of breakfast foods that included fresh fruit, pastries, and what looked like homemade jam. There was also a note, written in elegant script on heavy paper. "Good morning, please eat. Someone will be by later to see if you need anything. You are free to explore, though I'd recommend taking a guide. The court is large, and it's easy to get lost. M." Violet picked up the coffee and nearly moaned at the first sip. It was perfect, exactly how she liked it, which meant someone had either guessed very well or had information about her that they shouldn't. She ate because she was hungry, because the food was there and delicious, and because refusing it felt like a waste. Then she showered, using products that smelled of lavender and something else, something wild she couldn't name. The wardrobe yielded clothes that fit perfectly, soft pants, a loose tunic, and boots that were comfortable despite looking like they belonged in a period drama. There was a knock on the door just as she finished dressing. "Come in," Violet called, and a young woman entered. She was pale like all the others Violet had seen, with white hair cut in a short, practical style and dark eyes that were curious but kind. "Good morning. I'm Lyra. The king sent me to see if you needed anything and to offer my services as a guide if you'd like to explore." The king. It still sounded absurd. Malachi. Yes. Lyra smiled. He's been king since before I was turned, and I'm nearly a century old. He's a good ruler. Fair. Just. We're lucky to have him. He saved me from someone who was hurting me. Violet wasn't sure why she was offering this information to a stranger, except that Lyra's presence felt safe somehow. Then you're lucky too. Lyra gestured to the door. Would you like to see the court? It's really quite beautiful, and I promise not to let you get lost. Violet glanced at the room that had sheltered her, then back at Lyra. Yes, I'd like that. They left the room and entered the corridors, and in daylight, or whatever the underground equivalent was, the court was even more impressive. The stone walls were covered in carvings and paintings, some modern, some ancient, depicting vampire history in visual form. Gardens grew in caverns where bioluminescent plants provided light and beauty. Libraries held books in languages both living and dead. How many people live here? Violet asked as they walked. In the court proper, about 200. In the underground city beyond, maybe 3,000. Lyra navigated the halls with easy familiarity. There are other vampire enclaves around the world, other courts and kingdoms, but this one is the oldest and largest in this hemisphere. And Malachi rules all of them? Not exactly. He's the king here, and the other rulers respect him, consult with him, but they're not his subjects. Think of it more like allied nations with him as the most powerful leader. They passed other vampires who nodded politely to Lyra and stared at Violet with undisguised curiosity. Violet tried not to feel like a specimen under glass. They're not used to mortals here, Lyra explained. We don't usually bring humans into the deep court. It's too dangerous, too complicated. The fact that you're here under the king's personal protection is unusual. Why did he do it? Why help me? Lyra gave her a sideways look. I think that's a question you should ask him. They ended up in a garden that shouldn't exist, a cavern filled with plants that glowed in shades of blue and green and gold. A stream ran through it, water that came from some deep aquifer, and the sound it made was peaceful, timeless. Violet sat on a bench carved from what looked like a single piece of marble and tried to process everything. 24 hours ago, she'd been trapped in an apartment with a man who hit her, working at a diner to make rent, living a small, scared life. Now she was in an underground vampire kingdom, under the protection of an immortal king, and the strangest part was that she felt safer than she had in months. Can I ask you something? Violet said. Of course. How does someone become a vampire? How does it work? Lyra settled onto the bench beside her. The turning. It requires an exchange of blood and the will to survive. The vampire drains the mortal nearly to death, then gives them their blood. If the mortal is strong enough, if they survive the transition, they wake as one of us. If not, she shrugged. Not everyone survives. Have you turned anyone? No, it's not a decision to be made lightly, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm old enough or strong enough to safely turn someone. It takes power, control. Most vampires wait a century or more before attempting it. Violet absorbed this. Can you go out in sunlight? No, sunlight would burn us to ash in minutes. It's one of the few ways to kill us permanently. That and beheading, fire, or a stake through the heart. The old stories got some things right. And blood? We need it to survive. Not much and not often, but yes. We drink from mortals, usually willing donors who are compensated and treated well. The king is very strict about consent and safety. No hunting, no killing. Those are capital crimes in his court. He seems like a good person. Violet touched her bruised cheek absently. A good king. He is. Lyra's voice held genuine warmth. He's given us peace, stability, safety. Before him, the vampire world was fractured, violent, clans at war with each other, mortals being killed carelessly, attracting hunters and attention. Malachi ended that, brought us all under one law, one code. It wasn't easy, and he had to be ruthless sometimes, but it worked. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Violet found herself thinking about Malachi, about his strange pale beauty, his cold skin, his voice that seemed to reach inside her and promise safety, about the way he'd looked at her as if she mattered, as if her pain mattered. "Where is he now?" Violet asked. "The king? Probably in his study. He works most days, handling court business, diplomatic issues, all the tedious things that come with ruling." Lyra stood. "Would you like me to take you to him?" Violet's heart did something complicated. "Is that allowed?" "You're under his protection. You can go wherever you like, and I suspect he'd be glad to see you." They navigated back through the corridors to a part of the court that felt more private, more personal. Lyra stopped in front of a heavy door carved with symbols that hurt to look at too directly. "This is his study, just knock." She gave Violet an encouraging smile. "I'll find you later. Make sure you can get back to your room." Then she was gone, moving with that liquid vampire grace, and Violet was alone in front of the door. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then forced herself to follow through. "Enter." His voice, even through the door, made something in her chest tighten. Violet pushed the door open and stepped into a room that was part library, part office, part museum. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, and the desk in the center was covered in papers, maps, objects that looked ancient. Malachi sat behind the desk, looking up from whatever he'd been reading, and when his pale gray eyes met hers, Violet forgot how to breathe for a moment. "Violet." He stood immediately. "Is everything all right? Do you need something?" "No. Lyra gave me a tour and I wanted to thank you. For the room, the food, the clothes, for everything." She felt suddenly awkward, aware that she was intruding. "You're welcome." Malachi moved around the desk, and Violet noticed he moved differently when it was just them, less formally, more naturally. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." "True. No nightmares about Derek, no waking at every sound, no fear, just deep, dreamless rest." "Good. I'm glad." He gestured to a chair near the fireplace, one of two that faced each other across a low table. "Sit, please, unless you'd rather go back to your room." "No, I'll stay. If I'm not interrupting?" "You're not." He settled into the other chair, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Malachi said, "How's your face?" Violet touched her cheek. "Hurts, but I've had worse." "I don't like that you've had to say that sentence." His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath she heard something that might have been rage. "It's over now, right? Derek won't find me here. Derek won't find you anywhere." Malachi's expression was unreadable. "I made sure of that." "What did you do?" "Put the fear of God, or in this case, the fear of something older and far less forgiving into him. He won't come near you again, and if he's smart, he'll leave the city entirely." Violet should have felt bad about that, should have protested or defended Derek in some way. But all she felt was relief, pure and uncomplicated. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Violet asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she woke. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Malachi leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his attention focused entirely on her. "When I heard you crying, when you said he hit me again, something broke in me. Or maybe it woke up, I'm not sure which. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to get to you. That nothing else mattered except making sure you were safe." He paused. "I've lived 600 years, Violet. I've heard countless cries for help, watched countless injustices. I learned a long time ago to be selective about when I intervene. But with you, there was no choice. There was only the imperative to move, to protect, to claim you as mine." The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "Claim me?" Violet's voice came out softer than she intended. Poor word choice. But Malachi didn't look away. "I meant that I felt responsible for you, that your safety became my priority. That's all." It wasn't all, and they both knew it. But Violet let it pass because she wasn't ready to examine what she felt, wasn't ready to acknowledge the way her heart sped up when he looked at her, the way she felt safe for the first time in forever when he was near. "Can I ask you something?" she said instead. Anything. What's it like, being immortal? Malachi sat back, considering. Lonely, mostly. You watch everyone you care about age and die. You watch the world change, and you change with it. But you're always separate, always other. You accumulate knowledge and power and regret in equal measure. You learn to be careful about love because it always ends in loss. His eyes met hers. But it has its moments. Beautiful moments. Watching a sunrise you've seen 1,000 times and finding something new in it. Reading a book that won't be written for centuries and knowing you waited for it. Meeting someone who makes 600 years of careful isolation feel like a waste of time. Violet's breath caught. You mean me. I mean you. The confession sat between them, too large to ignore, too new to fully process. Violet found herself standing, moving to the window that looked out over the underground city, needing space to think. I'm just a waitress, she said to the glass. I'm mortal, human, ordinary. I have a high school education and student debt from a college I never finished. I work at a diner and live in a crappy apartment, and I was stupid enough to stay with a man who hit me. What could you possibly want with me? Malachi was beside her suddenly, not touching but close enough that she could feel the coolness he radiated. You survived. That's not nothing. You called for help when you needed it. That takes courage. And when I told you what I was, you didn't run screaming. You chose to come with me, to trust me. That takes faith. He turned to look at her profile. You think you're ordinary, but I see someone extraordinary. Someone who paints in her spare time even though she's exhausted, who reads fantasy novels because she wants to believe in magic, who put plants on her windowsill because she wanted something alive and growing in her space. You're not ordinary, Violet. You're surviving, and survival is its own kind of magic. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her life and seen value instead of failure. I don't know what to do with you, she whispered. You don't have to do anything. Just stay. Let me keep you safe. Let me... He trailed off, as if catching himself before saying too much. Let you what? Malachi turned to face her fully, and the expression on his face was vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed. Let me court you. Old-fashioned word, old-fashioned concept, but it's what I want. To know you, to spend time with you, to see if this thing between us is real or just the result of a dramatic rescue. And if it's real, then we figure it out, together. Violet looked up at him, at his ancient eyes and his pale beauty, and made another choice. Okay. Okay? Court me. Let's see what happens. The smile that crossed Malachi's face was like sunrise, rare and beautiful and worth waiting for. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her bruised cheek with a hand that was cool and gentle. I'll make you happy, he said. That's a promise. Don't promise things you can't control. I'm a 600-year-old vampire king. I control everything. Violet laughed, and it felt good, felt like medicine. Arrogant. Confident. He dropped his hand, but not the smile. There's a difference. The courting, as Malachi called it, was unlike anything Violet had experienced. He took her to the underground gardens and explained the bioluminescent plants, their biology and how vampires had cultivated them over centuries. He showed her the libraries and let her run her fingers over books that were older than any country she could name. He introduced her to members of the court who treated her with careful respect, though she could see the curiosity in their eyes. Days passed, then a week, and Violet found herself settling into a rhythm. She slept in her luxurious room, ate food that appeared as if by magic, and spent her time either exploring with Lyra or in Malachi's company. He made time for her every day, carving out hours from his busy schedule to simply be with her, to talk, to listen. And they talked about everything. Violet told him about her childhood, about parents who loved her but died too young, about the struggle to make it on her own, about Derek and how the relationship had slowly turned poisonous. Malachi told her about his human life. So long ago it felt like a story from a book, about being turned during a plague, about the early years of confusion and hunger before he learned control. He told her about building the court, about the politics of immortal beings, about the weight of ruling. "Do you miss it?" Violet asked one evening as they sat in the garden, her on the bench, him on the ground beside her, close enough to touch but not touching. "Being human?" Malachi considered. "I miss the sun. I miss eating food for pleasure rather than sustenance. I miss the simplicity of a finite life, of knowing death waited and therefore making choices with urgency." He looked up at her. "But I don't miss the weakness, the vulnerability, the brevity, and if I'd stayed human, I'd have died 600 years ago and never met you. So no, I don't miss it enough to regret what I am." "Do you ever turn people, make them vampires?" "Rarely. It's a serious decision to take someone's mortality. I've turned maybe a dozen people in 6 centuries, and only when they begged me, only when they understood fully what they were asking for." "Would you turn me?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "If I asked, I mean, would you?" Malachi's expression turned serious. "Yes, but I would make sure you understood what you were giving up first. I would make sure you had time to think, to be certain. It's not something to rush into." "But you would." "Violet, if you asked me to turn you, I would. If you asked me to let you go back to your mortal life, I would. If you asked me to move the sun and stars for you, I'd find a way." His voice was low, intense. "I don't know what this is between us, but it's real, and it's powerful, and I would do nearly anything you asked." Violet reached out and touched his hair, the white silk of it sliding through her fingers. "That's a dangerous amount of power to give someone." "Then use it wisely." He leaned into her touch like a cat seeking affection, and the gesture was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Violet felt her heart crack open a little wider. They were falling in love. Violet knew it, could feel it happening like a tide she couldn't fight. Every conversation brought them closer. Every shared laugh, every moment of comfortable silence, every time their hands brushed and electricity sparked between them, it was all building toward something inevitable. And then Derek found her. It shouldn't have been possible. The court was hidden, protected by magic and secrecy that had kept it safe for centuries. But Derek, in his desperate rage, had done something stupid. He'd hired a hunter. Hunters were rare, humans who knew about vampires and made it their mission to destroy them. They were dangerous, trained, and absolutely committed to their cause. This one was named Marcus Shaw, and he'd been tracking vampire activity in the city for months. When Derek came to him with a story about a vampire taking his girlfriend, Marcus saw an opportunity. Derek wanted Violet back. Marcus wanted access to the vampire court. They formed an alliance based on mutual need and mutual hatred. The first sign of trouble was when the wards around the court began to fail. Subtle at first, then catastrophically. Marcus had spent years studying vampire magic, learning how to unravel it, and with Derek's inside information about where Violet had been taken, he'd found his way to the court's doorstep. Malachi felt it instantly, the wards failing like a spiderweb torn apart. He was in a council meeting when the alarm sounded, a low thrumming that every vampire in the court could feel in their bones. "We're under attack," Serafina said unnecessarily. Malachi was already moving, his mind on one thing only, Violet. She was in the garden, had said she wanted to paint the bioluminescent plants. He ran, using speed that blurred his form, taking corners so fast he nearly left afterimages. He found her in the garden, but she wasn't alone. Derek stood there, looking haggard and wild, a gun in his shaking hand pointed at Violet. Behind him, partially hidden in the shadows, was a man Malachi didn't recognize but whose stance and scent marked him as human, as hunter. "Step away from her." Malachi's voice was death itself, cold and absolute. Around him, the air grew frigid, frost forming on the leaves of nearby plants. "No," Derek's voice cracked. "She's mine. She belongs to me. You had no right." "I had every right." Malachi moved forward, and Derek jerked the gun in his direction. "Don't move! I'll shoot her, I swear to God." "You won't." Malachi's voice was calm, reasonable, which made it more terrifying. "Because you know that if you hurt her, what I do to you will last for days. Weeks, if I'm creative. And I'm very creative when properly motivated. From the shadows, Marcus Shaw emerged, and he had his own weapon, a crossbow loaded with wooden bolts. "Vampire King," he said, almost respectfully. "I've heard stories." "Then you know how this ends." "I do, with your court exposed, your people scattered, and your head as a trophy." Marcus raised the crossbow. "Nothing personal, just business." "It's very personal." Malachi's eyes shifted, the gray bleeding to silver that glowed in the dim light. Around him, the temperature continued to drop, and shadows that shouldn't exist began to move with purpose. "You brought a mortal here, you threatened someone under my protection, and you've made the fatal mistake of thinking you're the apex predator in this scenario. I have blessed wood and holy water. I know how to kill your kind. And I have 600 years of experience killing yours." Malachi moved, faster than a mortal eye could track, and suddenly he was in front of Marcus, his hand wrapped around the crossbow, crushing it to splinters. "Your knowledge is incomplete." Marcus stumbled back, reaching for other weapons, and Derek panicked and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was obscenely loud in the garden, and for a horrible moment, Violet thought she'd been hit. But Malachi had moved again, putting himself between her and the bullet, and it hit him in the shoulder with an impact that would have dropped a mortal man. Malachi looked down at the wound, at the blood that was darker than human blood, then up at Derek with eyes that had gone completely silver. Mistake! What happened next was fast and brutal. Malachi disarmed Derek with a casual violence that broke the mortal's wrist, then turned his attention to Marcus. The hunter was good, was trained, but he was human and slow, and Malachi was an apex predator who had just seen someone he cared about threatened. It was over in seconds. Marcus on the ground, unconscious, but alive. Derek whimpering, cradling his broken wrist, and Malachi standing between them and Violet, breathing hard despite not needing to breathe, his shoulder bleeding but already healing. "Violet!" He turned to her, and his eyes were still that eerie silver. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. She'd just seen him move like a demon, had seen what he was capable of when truly unleashed, and it should have terrified her. But all she felt was safe, because he'd put himself between her and danger without a second thought. Other vampires poured into the garden, responding to the disturbance, and Constantine took charge of the prisoners. Malachi moved to Violet and pulled her into his arms, and he was shaking, actually shaking. "I could have lost you," he said into her hair. "If I'd been a second slower, if he'd aimed better. But you weren't, and he didn't." Violet pulled back to look at his shoulder. "You're hurt." "I'm healing, I'm fine." He cupped her face with both hands. "You're the one who matters. Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm okay, I promise." She covered his hands with hers. "You saved me. Again. I'll always save you. That's not a promise, it's a fact." They stood there while the court erupted into activity around them, and Violet made another choice, the most important one yet. "Turn me." Malachi froze. "What?" "Turn me into a vampire. I want to stay with you, and if I stay mortal, I'll age and die, and this will be over before it really begins. But if you turn me, we could have forever." She searched his face. "Unless you don't want that." "Want it?" "Violet, I've wanted it since the moment I saw you. But I won't rush you into this. It's too important, too permanent. I'm sure." And she was. Looking at him, at his pale beauty and his ancient eyes and the blood on his shoulder from a bullet he'd taken for her, Violet had never been more certain of anything. "I don't want to be vulnerable anymore. I don't want to watch you from the outside of immortality. I want to be with you. Really with you, for as long as possible." Malachi's expression went through several emotions: hope, fear, joy, concern. "We'll do it right. There's a ritual, preparations, and you'll need to feed for the first time immediately after turning, which means planning and care and all the things you're good at." Violet smiled. "So plan. Prepare. And when it's time, turn me." He kissed her then, the first real kiss between them, and it was soft and careful and full of promise. His lips were cool against hers, his hands gentle on her face, and Violet felt like she was falling and being caught at the same time. When they pulled apart, Malachi's eyes had returned to their normal pale gray. "I'll make this perfect for you. I swear it. I know you will." The next 2 weeks were a flurry of preparation. Malachi explained the process in detail, making sure Violet understood what she was asking for: the death of her mortal self, the rebirth as something new, the hunger for blood, the aversion to sunlight, the weight of immortality. He was thorough, almost obsessive, in his need to make sure she knew what she was choosing. Violet listened to all of it and didn't waver. She'd made her choice, and every day she spent with Malachi confirmed it. She was falling in love with him completely, with his careful kindness and his dry humor and the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in any of his 600 years. The court prepared as well. Turning someone was a significant event, especially when done by the king himself. There were rituals to observe, ceremonies to perform. Violet met with Serafina, who explained what the first days as a vampire would be like: the disorientation and hunger, and the slow learning of control. "It's not easy," Serafina warned. "The first year is the hardest. You'll be stronger than you know how to be, faster, with senses that are overwhelming. You'll need to learn to control the hunger, to move among mortals without giving yourself away." "Will Malachi help me?" "He'll be with you every step. A sire bond is powerful, especially when there's already love involved." Serafina smiled. "You'll be fine. You're stronger than you think." The night of the turning, Violet dressed in white, a tradition that symbolized the death of the mortal self. The ceremony took place in a private chamber deep in the court, attended only by Malachi, Serafina, and Constantine as witnesses. Malachi looked at Violet like she was about to step off a cliff, and maybe she was. "Last chance," he said quietly. "If you have any doubts, any hesitation, we stop now." "No doubts." Violet took his hand. "I choose this. I choose you." He pulled her close and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then let's begin." The turning was intimate and intense. Malachi bit her wrist first, drinking her blood while she watched, and Violet felt the pull of it, the draw, as he took her life force into himself. When he'd taken enough that she was weak, dizzy, he bit his own wrist and brought it to her mouth. "Drink," he commanded softly. "Drink and live." His blood was strange, thicker than she expected, with a taste like copper and wine and something indefinable. She drank, and power flowed into her, alien and overwhelming. Her heart raced, then slowed, then stopped completely. The world went dark. Violet woke to agony. Every cell in her body was changing, dying and being reborn as something new. She was vaguely aware of Malachi holding her, his voice in her ear speaking words of comfort in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. Time lost meaning. There was only pain and darkness and the sense of being unmade and remade. And then it stopped. Violet opened her eyes, and the world was different. Everything was sharper, clearer, more vivid. She could hear hearts beating in distant parts of the court, could smell the stone and the age and the blood of every vampire nearby. She could see in the dark as if it were daylight, could feel the strength in her body that hadn't been there before. "Violet?" Malachi's voice, close and concerned. "Can you hear me?" "I can hear everything." Her own voice sounded strange, richer, more resonant. She sat up and looked at her hands. They were pale, paler than they'd been, with a luminous quality to the skin. Did it work? It worked. Malachi helped her stand, and she was surprised by how easy movement was, how graceful she felt. "How do you feel?" "Strong, different, hungry." The hunger was there, a gnawing emptiness that demanded to be filled. "That's normal. We need to feed you." Malachi guided her out of the chamber, and Violet was amazed by how fast she could move, how little effort it took to keep pace with him. They went to a room where a mortal waited, a young man who looked calm and unafraid. "This is Thomas," Malachi explained. "He's a willing donor, compensated and treated well. He'll let you feed, and I'll be here to make sure you stop before taking too much." Violet approached Thomas carefully, and the hunger surged when she got close, when she could smell the blood just beneath his skin. Malachi showed her how to bite, where to place her new fangs, and yes, she had fangs now. She could feel them, and when she finally bit down and blood flowed into her mouth, it was like coming home. She drank, and power flowed with the blood, strength, and life. Malachi's hand on her shoulder reminded her to stop, and she pulled away reluctantly, licking the wound to seal it as instinct taught her. Thomas smiled, looking dazed but happy. "Welcome to the family," he said, and then he was escorted out by Constantine. Violet turned to Malachi, and he was watching her with an expression that was part pride, part relief, part something deeper. "You did well, very controlled for a first feeding." "I feel amazing." And she did. The hunger had receded, replaced by a sense of completeness she'd never experienced. Is it always like this? It gets easier. The hunger becomes manageable, part of you rather than something that controls you. He pulled her close. "You're vampire now, Violet. Immortal. Strong. Mine." "Yours," she agreed, and kissed him. The first months of Violet's new existence were full of learning and discovery. She trained with Seraphina to control her strength, learning how to move among mortals without accidentally hurting them. She studied with Constantine to understand vampire politics and law, and she spent every moment she could with Malachi, deepening the bond between them. They were happy, deliriously, surprisingly happy. Malachi, who had been alone for so long, found himself constantly seeking her out, inventing reasons to be in her presence. Violet, who had never felt truly safe or loved, bloomed under his attention like a plant finally given proper sunlight. 6 months after her turning, Malachi took her to a private chamber she'd never seen before. It was at the top of one of the court's towers, a room with a domed ceiling painted to show the night sky. "I wanted to show you this," he said, leading her to the center of the room where a telescope stood pointed at a section of the dome. "Look." Violet peered through the telescope and gasped. What she'd thought was a painting was actually a complex system of mirrors and lenses, reflecting the actual sky far above them. She could see stars, real stars, crisp and clear. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I had it built a century ago, when I realized how much I missed seeing the sky." Malachi stood behind her, his arms around her waist. "I wanted to share it with you." Violet turned in his arms to face him. "I love you. I know I haven't said it yet, but I do. I love you completely." The smile that crossed his face was the sun rising. "I love you too. I've loved you since you cried on the phone and trusted me to help. I've loved you through every moment since, and I'll love you for whatever forever we get." They made love that night under the false sky with its real stars, and it was tender and passionate, and everything Violet had never dared to hope for. Malachi was careful with her, reverent, treating her like something precious even though she was now strong enough to match him. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Violet traced patterns on his pale skin. "What happened to Derek and the hunter?" "Derek is in a psychiatric facility, babbling about vampires. No one believes him." Malachi's voice was flat. "Marcus Shaw was given a choice: leave the city and never hunt again, or die. He chose to leave. You let him live? I'm not needlessly cruel. He was doing what he thought was right, protecting humanity from monsters. He was wrong about us being monsters, but his intentions weren't evil. So I gave him a chance." He kissed her temple. "And I wanted to move past it, to focus on you instead of revenge." Violet snuggled closer. "Good choice." Time passed, measured in years rather than days. Violet adjusted to immortality, finding joy in the little things, learning new languages with Malachi as her teacher, exploring the underground city, making friends among the court. She discovered she had a talent for vampire politics, a way of seeing through the games and machinations that made her invaluable in council meetings. Malachi stepped back from some of his duties, trusting her to handle more, and the court accepted her as their queen in all but name. When he finally made it official, placing a crown on her head in a ceremony that drew vampires from around the world, no one was surprised. Violet Ortiz, the waitress who had dialed a wrong number in desperation, became Violet Xanthakis, Vampire Queen, and she wore the title with grace and power. They ruled together, Malachi and Violet, two halves of a whole. Where he was cold logic and ancient strategy, she was warmth and modern practicality. Where he saw threats, she saw opportunities for alliance. They balanced each other perfectly, and under their joint rule, the vampire world flourished. On the 10th anniversary of the night Violet had called that wrong number, they stood in the garden where Derek had tried to take her back, where Malachi had taken a bullet for her. The bioluminescent plants glowed softly, and somewhere in the distance, water sang over stone. "Do you have any regrets?" Malachi asked, holding her hand. Violet thought about her mortal life, about the struggles and pain, about Derek and fear and working herself to exhaustion. Then she thought about the last decade, about love and safety, about learning to be powerful, about building a life with someone who saw her truly. "Not one," she said, "not even the sun. We have our own light." She gestured at the glowing plants, at the captured starlight that lit their underground kingdom. "And besides, the sun never loved me the way you do." Malachi pulled her close, and she went willingly, fitting against him like she was made for this, for him. "I didn't think I believed in fate," he murmured. "But you dialed my number out of all the numbers in the city. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You chose to stay when you could have left. How is that not fate?" "Maybe it is," Violet agreed. "Or maybe it's just luck. Or maybe it's just that sometimes, when you're lost and you reach out in the dark, the right person catches you. I'll always catch you. I know, and I'll always be here to catch you back." They kissed under the glow of impossible plants, in an impossible garden, in an impossible life that had started with a wrong number and a sob, and a vampire king who learned, after 600 years, that his heart could still break and heal and love. Above them, far above in the mortal world they'd left behind, the sun was setting. But down here, in the deep places where vampires made their home, their own light burned steady and true, and two people who should never have found each other held tight and knew, with the certainty of immortals, that they had forever. And forever started with a choice, with a phone call, with 3 words that changed everything. "He hit me again," and ended with 3 different words spoken in tandem, a promise renewed every night: "I love you." The court thrived under their rule. Violet introduced innovations that made life easier for younger vampires, programs that helped them adjust to immortality, partnerships with mortal communities that provided willing donors and mutual protection. Malachi backed every initiative, using his centuries of experience to smooth the way politically. Together, they were unstoppable. Years turned to decades, and while the mortal world above changed and shifted, the vampire court remained constant, a pocket of stability in the chaos. Violet learned to fight from Constantine, studied ancient texts with Serafina, and discovered she had a gift for what Malachi called diplomatic violence, the ability to negotiate peace while making it clear that war was also an option. They traveled sometimes, visiting other vampire courts, building alliances that made their territory safe. They saw wonders. Vampire kingdoms hidden in mountains, covens that lived in the Arctic where winter nights lasted months, ancient bloodlines that traced back to civilizations long forgotten by mortal history. But they always returned home, to the underground palace and its glowing gardens, to the court they'd built together. On the 20th anniversary, Serafina approached them with a request. "I want to step down as advisor," she said. "I've served for 200 years. It's time I did something else." Malachi looked stricken. "Serafina, you're invaluable. I can't." "You can," she interrupted gently. "You have Violet now. You don't need me the way you once did. And I want to travel, to see what the world has become, to have adventures before I get too set in my ways." She smiled at Violet. "You've inspired me, reminded me that immortality is wasted if you spend it doing the same thing forever." So Serafina left, though she promised to return, and in her place, Violet took on more responsibility. She became not just queen in name but in function, and she was brilliant at it. The court adored her, the younger vampires especially, who saw in her someone who remembered mortality, who understood their struggles. Malachi watched her flourish with a pride so profound it sometimes hurt. This woman who had called him by accident, who had trusted him in her darkest hour, had become a leader, a force, a legend in her own right. And she was his, chose him every night, loved him with an intensity that hadn't diminished even slightly across 2 decades. "I have something for you," he said one evening, leading her to his study. "You're always giving me things." But Violet followed, curious. On his desk was a painting covered with a cloth. Malachi pulled the cloth away, and Violet gasped. It was her, painted in oils, but not as she was now. The painting showed her as she'd been the night they met, bruised, frightened, but with something unbreakable in her eyes. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was Malachi's pale face, his hand reaching out to her. "I commissioned it," he said quietly, "so we'd never forget where we started, what we survived to get here." Violet's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "It's perfect. We should hang it in the throne room." "In the throne room?" "So everyone can see. So they remember that strength doesn't mean you were never broken. It means you put yourself back together." She turned to him. "You helped me do that. Put myself back together. Build something new from the pieces. We did it together." Malachi pulled her into his arms. "Everything worth doing, we've done together." They hung the painting in the throne room, and it became a symbol for the court. The broken queen and the vampire king who caught her, a reminder that their rulers understood pain, understood survival, understood the long road from darkness to light. More years passed, 30 years, 40, 50, since that wrong number. Violet looked exactly as she had the night she was turned, frozen in eternal youth and beauty, but her eyes held the weight of decades. She was no longer the frightened waitress, but a queen who commanded respect from every vampire in their territory and beyond. And Malachi, who had ruled alone for so long, couldn't imagine existence without her. She was woven into every part of his life, his thoughts, his future. When he planned policy, he considered her input. When he faced challenges, he sought her counsel. When he was tired, he found rest in her presence. They talked sometimes about what came next, about the centuries stretching ahead of them, about the changes they wanted to make, the places they wanted to see, the things they wanted to accomplish. "We could explore the world," Violet suggested one night. "Really explore it. Take a century off from ruling and just wander." "And leave the court?" "Constantine could manage. Or we could appoint a regent. The court is stable enough now that it doesn't need us constantly." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "Don't you want to see everything? All the places you've never been, all the things you've never done?" Malachi considered, running his fingers through her hair, still dark, still beautiful. "Would you be with me?" "Always." "Then yes. Let's wander. Let's see the world. Let's have adventures." He pulled her down for a kiss. "Let's do everything and anything as long as we do it together." They made plans. Real plans, with timelines and destinations and dreams. They would leave the court in capable hands and spend the next 50 years exploring, learning, experiencing. They would see every continent, every hidden vampire community, every wonder the world had to offer. But first, they had one last duty. Thomas, the young man who had been Violet's first feeding all those years ago, came to them with a request. He was dying. Cancer that medicine couldn't cure, and he had a choice to make. "Turn me," he asked. "I want to serve the court. I want to live." Malachi and Violet looked at each other, a whole conversation happening in that glance. Then Violet turned back to Thomas. "Are you sure? Do you understand what you're asking? I've spent 30 years watching vampires, learning from them, living among them. I know what I'm asking, and I want it. Please." So Violet turned him, her first and only turning, and she did it with the same care Malachi had shown her. Thomas survived the transition and woke as one of them, and the court gained another member. It felt right, felt like completing a circle. The man who had been Violet's first meal became her vampire son, and he went on to become one of their most loyal supporters. Everything was falling into place. The court was stable, plans for their travels were made, and their love had deepened into something that felt as permanent as the stone around them. And then fate, which had brought them together, tried to tear them apart. A hunter appeared in the city, not just any hunter, but a descendant of Marcus Shaw, the man who had once tried to expose the court. This new Shaw, a woman named Diana, had trained her entire life for this moment. She had weapons blessed by a dozen different religions, spells bought from desperate witches, and a burning hatred for vampires that made her dangerous. She also had a plan. Diana Shaw knew she couldn't take the vampire court head-on, so she did something clever. She poisoned the blood supply, used a toxin that wouldn't kill mortals but would make their blood fatal to vampires. Donors started getting sick, and vampires who fed from them started dying, true death that nothing could prevent. The court descended into chaos. Vampires were afraid to feed, the careful system Malachi and Violet had built threatening to collapse. And all the while, Diana Shaw watched and waited, preparing for the moment when the vampire king would be weak enough to kill. Malachi threw all his resources into finding the source of the poison, into protecting his people. Violet worked alongside him, coordinating efforts, keeping the court from dissolving into panic. They barely slept, barely took time to feed themselves, running on willpower and determination. It was Violet who finally figured it out, who pieced together the pattern of poisonings and traced it back to Shaw. And it was Violet who insisted on confronting the hunter herself. "No," Malachi's voice was absolute. "I won't let you walk into a trap. It's not a trap if we're prepared, and I'm the one she won't expect. She's hunting for you, the vampire king. She won't be ready for me." Violet took his hands. "Trust me, I can end this. And if something goes wrong, then you come in and save me, like you always do." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're running out of time, Malachi. More vampires are dying every day. We have to stop her now." He wanted to refuse, wanted to lock her away somewhere safe and deal with Shaw himself. But Violet was right, and he knew it. She was smart, capable, powerful in her own right, and more than that, she deserved to fight her own battles, to be seen as strong rather than protected. "Together," he said finally, "we face her, together." They found Diana Shaw in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location so cliché Violet almost laughed. The hunter was waiting, surrounded by weapons and arcane symbols drawn on the floor, in what looked like silver paint. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," Diana said as they entered. "The great vampire king and his pet waitress." Violet felt Malachi tense beside her. "I'm no one's pet," she said calmly. "And you're going to stop poisoning our blood supply." "Or what? You'll kill me? I'm ready to die if it means taking you monsters with me." Diana raised a crossbow loaded with a bolt that gleamed with an oily sheen, more poison probably. "My ancestor failed to destroy your court. I won't." "Your ancestor was given mercy and threw it away," Malachi said. "Don't make the same mistake." "Mercy? You call exile mercy? He spent the rest of his life knowing he'd failed, knowing you monsters were still out there feeding on innocence. It broke him." Diana's face twisted with old grief and new rage. "So no, I don't want your mercy. I want justice. We don't feed on innocence." Violet moved slowly to the side, trying to flank the hunter without being obvious. "We have willing donors, people who are compensated and protected. We have laws, ethics, systems that keep everyone safe. You're predators. You can't change what you are." "No, but we can choose how we act. We can choose to be better than our nature." Violet was close enough now that she could see the desperation in Diana's eyes, the exhaustion of someone who had devoted their entire life to a single purpose. "You don't have to do this. Whatever poison you're using, give us the antidote and walk away. We won't follow you." "There is no antidote." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. No antidote meant the vampires who had been poisoned would die, that the contamination in the blood supply would kill anyone who fed. Malachi moved then, faster than Diana could track, and he had her wrist in his hand before she could fire the crossbow. But Diana was prepared for that, had a backup plan. She triggered something, a mechanism built into her jacket, and suddenly the room filled with a fine mist that smelled of silver and garlic and something else, something wrong. Malachi staggered back, his grip on Diana loosening. Violet felt it too, a weakness that made her knees buckle. Whatever was in the mist, it was designed to incapacitate vampires. Diana scrambled away, readying her crossbow. I told you I was prepared. I've spent my whole life studying your kind, learning how to kill you. Did you think I wouldn't have contingencies? She aimed at Malachi, whose back was turned, who was trying to reach Violet through the weakening mist. The shot would kill him. Violet knew it with absolute certainty. And even knowing she was weak, even knowing she was vulnerable, Violet moved. She was between Malachi and the crossbow when Diana fired, and the bolt took her in the chest, right above her heart. Pain exploded through her, worse than the turning, worse than anything she'd experienced. The poison on the bolt was the same that had contaminated the blood supply, and it burned through her like acid. Violet fell, and Malachi caught her, his face white even by vampire standards. No, 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 no. I'm okay, Violet managed, but she wasn't. She could feel the poison spreading, could feel her immortal body trying and failing to fight it off. Malachi, stay with me. His voice broke. Violet, please, stay with me. Diana stood over them, crossbow still raised, and for a moment she looked uncertain. She took the shot for you. Why would she do that? Because I love him. Violet's voice was fading. Because love means protecting, even if it costs everything. The words seemed to hit Diana harder than any attack could have. She lowered the crossbow slowly, staring at them as if seeing them for the first time. You really do love each other. More than life. Malachi looked up at her, and tears were streaming down his face, blood tears that left red tracks on his pale skin. Please, if you have any humanity left, if you believe in mercy at all, help her. Give us the antidote. I told you there isn't one. Then make one. You created the poison, you must know what's in it, how to counteract it. His voice rose to a shout. Please, I'll give you anything, money, power, my own life. Just save her. Diana stared at them, at the vampire king cradling his dying queen, and something in her face shifted. Some of the rage drained away, replaced by exhaustion and maybe regret. The poison was designed to bind with vampire blood, to turn it toxic. The only antidote would be a complete blood transfusion, every drop replaced with clean blood. She knelt beside them. But that would require draining her completely and refilling her faster than she dies. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible. Malachi looked around wildly, then back at Diana. You're human. Your blood isn't poisoned. You want to drain me? Partially, enough to dilute the poison in her system while I find more donors. He was already calculating, his mind racing through the logistics. It might work. It has to work. Diana looked at Violet, who was growing paler by the second, her breathing shallow. Then she made a choice of her own. Do it. Take what you need. Malachi didn't waste time questioning. He bit his own wrist first, giving Violet his blood to slow the poison's spread. Then he turned to Diana and bit her wrist with as much gentleness as he could manage, and he drank. Diana's blood was clean, untainted, and when Malachi gave it to Violet, they could all see the immediate effect. The pallor receded slightly, the breathing eased, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Malachi pulled out his phone and made one call. I need every vampire in the court who can spare blood here now, and I need clean human donors. Move. They came. In minutes the warehouse filled with vampires and humans alike, all responding to their king's desperate summons. Constantine organized them with military efficiency, and what followed was a controlled chaos of blood transfusions and medical precision. Violet drifted in and out of consciousness through it all, aware of Malachi's presence, his voice, his desperate hope. She felt blood flowing into her, felt the poison being diluted, pushed out, overwhelmed by sheer volume of clean blood. It took hours. The sun rose above ground while below, in that warehouse, an entire community worked to save their queen. And slowly, infinitely slowly, Violet stabilized. When she finally opened her eyes fully, the first thing she saw was Malachi's face, haggard with worry and hope. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey yourself." His voice cracked. "Don't ever do that again." "Take a crossbow bolt for you? Can't promise that." "Violet, I'd do it again." She reached up to touch his face. 1,000 times, whatever it takes to keep you safe. "You're supposed to let me protect you." Protection goes both ways. She looked around and saw the gathered crowd, vampires and humans, and in the corner, Diana Shaw looking lost. "What happened?" "You almost died. We saved you, and we have a new ally, maybe." Malachi glanced at Diana. She helped. Violet struggled to sit up, and Malachi supported her. She felt weak, wrung out, but alive. Definitely alive. She looked at Diana and said, "Thank you." Diana flinched. "I'm the one who poisoned you in the first place. But you helped save me when you could have let me die." Violet held out a hand. "That counts for something." After a long moment, Diana took her hand. "I spent my whole life believing vampires were evil. But evil things don't love like that. Don't sacrifice for each other. Don't build communities where humans and vampires work together." She looked around at the gathered crowd. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you were taught wrong," Violet said gently. "But you can learn new things. You can choose different." In the end, Diana Shaw became the first human liaison to the vampire court, using her knowledge of hunter networks to help broker peace between vampires and those who hunted them. It was strange, unlikely, but it worked. And Violet recovered fully, the poison purged from her system, leaving her more determined than ever to live fully, to love completely, to never take a single night for granted. She and Malachi finally took their trip, 50 years of wandering the world. They saw the northern lights from a vampire settlement in Iceland, walked the Great Wall of China at midnight, danced in the ruins of Pompeii under a harvest moon. They met ancient vampires who remembered civilizations long gone, young vampires who were shaping the future, and everywhere they went, they were together. When they returned to the court after 50 years, they were different people, more weathered, more wise, more certain than ever that what they had was worth any price, any fight, any sacrifice. They resumed their rule with renewed purpose, implementing changes they'd dreamed up during their travels, building bridges between their world and the mortal one. Under their leadership, vampire society evolved, became something new, something better. And through it all, they loved each other with the same intensity as that first night, when a wrong number had connected two souls across the distance of species and circumstance. On the 100th anniversary of their meeting, the court threw a celebration that drew vampires from around the world. The throne room was decorated with glowing flowers, and music played that blended centuries of styles. Vampires danced with humans, old enemies shared drinks, and at the center of it all, Malachi and Violet stood together, watching their world with satisfaction. 100 years, Violet said. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. That's immortality for you. Malachi pulled her close. Do you ever regret it, choosing this life? Never, not for a second. She looked up at him. You? Regretting you? Impossible. You're the best thing that's happened in 600 years. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for dialing my number. Thank you for answering. They swayed to the music, and around them, their court, their family, their people celebrated. And somewhere far above, in the mortal world they'd left behind, The phone that had connected them that desperate night was long gone, replaced by newer technology, better systems. But the connection it had created remained strong as steel, deep as eternity, true as anything could be true. Violet had dialed a wrong number, crying, "He hit me again." And the Vampire King had answered, "Don't move." And from that moment, from that collision of pain and protection, had grown something that would last forever. A love that transcended species, time, and every obstacle placed in its path. A partnership that changed both of them and their entire world. They ruled for centuries more, Violet and Malachi, the vampire queen and king who had found each other by accident and chosen each other by design. And when historians of the vampire world told their story in ages to come, they always started the same way. Once upon a time, a mortal woman in her darkest hour reached out for help, and an immortal king answered. And in that answer was the beginning of everything. Everything, including happily ever after.